On her wedding day, her fiancé slapped her and announced he would marry her younger sister instead, but Hailey stood at the altar, heart pounding, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Instead, in front of a room full of guests, Andre, her fiancé, the man she had loved and trusted, struck her across the face. Gasps filled the air, but his next words shattered her world completely. "I won't be marrying Hailey today. Instead, I'll be marrying her younger sister, because she's carrying my child and will inherit her bakery." Silence. Shock. Betrayal. As Hailey's vision blurred, she felt her world tilt, but she didn't fall. No, she straightened her spine, swallowed her pain, and lifted her chin. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken her. But in 1 hour, she would make them regret ever underestimating her. Hailey Turner had always been a dreamer, but more than that, she was a fighter. From the moment she stepped into her mother's kitchen as a child, watching her knead dough with effortless grace, she knew she wanted to create something of her own. The warm scent of cinnamon, the golden crust of fresh bread, the laughter shared over a plate of pastries. It wasn't just food, it was love. It was home. But dreams didn't come easy, and neither did success. Chicago was a tough city, and opening a business from scratch with no family wealth, no safety net, and no one to lean on was a battle she had fought alone. While others partied in their 20s, she spent sleepless nights perfecting recipes, waking before dawn to prepare the first batch of croissants, and staying long past closing to clean every corner of her tiny bakery. Every cent she earned went back into the business: flour, sugar, rent, electricity. She had built her bakery with her own 2 hands, and every brick of that place carried the weight of her sacrifice. Still, she never complained. She had done it. Turner's Bakery wasn't just another shop on the block. It had become a staple in the neighborhood, known for its melt-in-your-mouth pastries and rich, creamy cakes. Customers came from all over, not just for the food, but for Hailey herself, her warm smile, the way she remembered their favorite orders, the way she made every person feel like they belonged. But amidst her triumph, there was one responsibility she hadn't expected: Lila, her younger sister. When their parents died in a tragic car accident 7 years ago, Hailey had been just 25, barely scraping by. Yet, without hesitation, she stepped up to take care of Lila, who was only 21 at the time. She found her a place to stay, covered her bills, and eventually brought her into the bakery, giving her a job when she struggled to find direction in life. At first, Hailey didn't mind. She loved Lila deeply, and family meant everything to her. They had survived the worst together, and she believed that their bond was unbreakable. But something had always felt off. Lila was different from her. Impulsive, carefree, never one to take responsibility seriously. She was beautiful, charming, and knew exactly how to use her looks to get what she wanted. While Hailey worked tirelessly, Lila often showed up late, skipped shifts, and left early, always with some flimsy excuse. "It's just who she is," Hailey told herself. "She'll grow up eventually." And then there was Andre Moore. He had walked into her bakery on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon, dressed in a crisp suit, exuding effortless charm. Hailey had barely looked up from the counter when she heard his smooth voice say, "1 black coffee and whatever pastry you recommend." She had glanced at him, mildly curious. There was something about his confidence, the way he carried himself, that felt magnetic. He became a regular. Every day, without fail, he came in for coffee, always lingering just a little longer, making conversation, flashing that perfectly rehearsed smile. Soon, he started asking questions, not just about the bakery, but about her. What she liked, what she dreamed of, what she wanted for her future. It had been so long since someone had looked at her, not just as a businesswoman, not just as Lila's older sister, but as Hailey. And when he finally asked her out, she hesitated. Dating wasn't something she had time for. But Andre? He was different. Successful. Ambitious. A man who seemed to understand hard work, who admired her drive. One date turned into 2, then 3, then weekends spent together, laughter shared over candlelit dinners. Before she knew it, she was in love. And when he proposed, with a diamond ring that sparkled like a promise of a future she had never dared to dream of, she had said yes without a second thought. She was finally getting her happily ever after. Or so she thought, because what she didn't see, what she never suspected, was the dark truth lurking just beneath the surface. Lila's secret smiles, the hushed conversations behind closed doors, the stolen glances between her fiancé and her sister, the betrayal waiting for her on her wedding day. Hailey had never been the kind of woman to doubt the people she loved. Trust was something she gave freely, perhaps too freely. And yet, as her wedding day crept closer, a strange feeling began to settle deep in her bones, like a quiet warning she couldn't quite shake. It started with small things. Andre, once eager to plan their future together, had become distant. Whenever she excitedly talked about their wedding, he barely seemed to listen, nodding absently while his fingers tapped against his phone. When she mentioned the honeymoon in Italy, his only response was, "Yeah, sure, sounds great." Great. She had spent weeks carefully choosing the perfect place. A quiet countryside villa with rolling green hills, something straight out of a fairy tale. But Andre's enthusiasm had faded. She told herself it was work. He had been talking a lot about business deals and expansion lately. Maybe stress was getting to him. Then there was Lila. Her younger sister had always been carefree, sometimes reckless, but lately she had been acting strange. Disappearing for hours, sneaking off to take secret phone calls, always looking over her shoulder like she was hiding something. "Where were you today?" Hailey had asked one afternoon when Lila strolled into the bakery hours late, her lipstick slightly smudged, her hair tousled like she had been somewhere she shouldn't have been. "Oh, just out," Lila said lightly, slipping behind the counter without looking at her. "You worry too much, sophomore." Something about her tone made Hailey pause. The uneasiness stirred again. That night, it got worse. She was in the kitchen, finishing up the last of the wedding details, when she heard voices coming from the hallway. Hushed, urgent whispers. She froze. It was Andre. And Lila. Her breath hitched as she inched closer, heart pounding against her ribs. She couldn't make out everything, but she caught snippets, words that made her stomach twist. "Not now, she'll find out. Just wait until after. It's almost ours." Hailey's throat tightened. Almost theirs? What did that mean? She didn't confront them. Not yet. She forced herself to act normal, even though every instinct screamed at her that something was wrong. The next day, she decided to surprise Andre at his office with lunch. She made his favorite sandwich, turkey and Swiss with a hint of mustard, just how he liked it. But when she arrived, his assistant looked confused. "Andre." The young woman blinked up at her. "Oh, he's not here." Hailey's stomach dropped. "Not here? But he told me he had meetings all day." The assistant hesitated, then lowered her voice. "I probably shouldn't say this, but he left a couple of hours ago. With a woman." Hailey felt the ground beneath her tilt. "What woman?" she forced herself to ask, even as her heart pounded. The assistant hesitated again. "I don't know her name," and was wearing a red dress. A red dress. Lila had worn a red dress that morning. A wave of nausea hit her, but still, she clung to denial. No, it had to be a coincidence. It had to be. That night, as she lay in bed beside Andre, she listened to his breathing. Deep. Even. Asleep. Slowly, carefully, she reached for his phone on the nightstand. It was locked. She knew his passcode. Her birthday. Or at least it had been. She tried it. Wrong. She tried again. Still wrong. Her chest tightened. He changed it. Why? The only reason to change a passcode was if you had something to hide. Her hands trembled as she put the phone back, staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding in her ears. For the first time in her life, she was afraid of the answer to a question she hadn't even asked yet. The morning of Hailey's wedding was supposed to be the happiest of her life. She woke up before dawn, the excitement bubbling in her chest despite the lingering unease she had been carrying for weeks. The sun painted the sky in soft hues of pink and gold as she stood before the mirror, the delicate lace of her wedding gown hugging her figure perfectly. Today was the day she had dreamed of since she was a little girl. The day she would finally have a family again, one she could build with Andre. The nagging doubts, the whispers in the dark, the unexplained absences, none of it mattered anymore. She told herself she was just overthinking. Andre loved her. He had chosen her. Hadn't he? The bridal suite was filled with the chatter of bridesmaids, the scent of fresh flowers, and the occasional pop of champagne bottles. Everyone was smiling, laughing, celebrating. But as Hailey sat in front of the mirror, something felt off. Lila was unusually quiet. She sat in the corner, absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone, offering the occasional half-smile when someone spoke to her. It wasn't the usual excitement one would expect from a sister on such an important day. Hailey stole a glance at her reflection. Was she imagining things? Was the weight of wedding stress making her paranoid? She took a deep breath. Focus on today. Focus on Andre. You love him and he loves you. That's all that matters. Her father's old pocket watch, a treasured keepsake she had tied to her bouquet, ticked steadily in her hands. The rhythmic sound was calming, grounding. Everything would be fine. The ceremony was set in a grand, picturesque garden, surrounded by tall, swaying trees. White roses lined the aisle, and golden sunlight streamed through the leaves, casting a warm glow over the guests. Hailey stepped forward, heart pounding. The music began to play. With each step down the aisle, she locked eyes with Andre, standing at the altar in a tailored black suit. His expression was unreadable, his jaw clenched, his hands tense at his sides. Something wasn't right. By the time she reached him, her fingers trembling slightly around her bouquet, the uneasy feeling in her chest had bloomed into full-blown fear. She turned to face him, waiting for him to take her hands. But he didn't. Instead, he took a deep breath, then slowly, almost deliberately, turned to the crowd. A hush fell over the guests. Andre exhaled sharply before speaking. "I won't be marrying Hailey today." The words echoed like a gunshot through the silent garden. Hailey's breath hitched, her fingers tightening around the bouquet as murmurs and gasps rippled through the crowd. Had she heard him correctly? She turned to Andre, heart pounding, searching his face for some explanation. Some sign that this was a cruel joke. But then he looked her dead in the eyes and said something even worse. "I'm marrying Lila instead." The world tilted beneath her feet. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She blinked at him, unable to process the words, the sheer audacity of what he had just said. Then, as if to drive the knife even deeper, Lila stood up from her seat, stepping forward. She was wearing white. Not a full wedding gown, but close enough, a sleek, elegant dress that clung to her body. But what caught Hailey's eye wasn't the dress. It was the slight swell of her stomach. It hit her all at once. Lila was pregnant. Andre's baby. Her stomach twisted into a tight, suffocating knot as the whispers around her grew louder. Andre turned to the crowd, speaking with the confidence of a man who had planned this moment. "Lila is carrying my child, and since she will be the mother of my heir, it only makes sense that I marry her instead." Hailey felt her breath leave her body. Heir? She wasn't royalty. This wasn't some medieval kingdom. And then she understood. Andre had never wanted her. He had wanted her business. Marriage to Hailey meant security. Her bakery, her blood, sweat, and tears, was valued at over $2 million. And if they had married, it would have legally been half his. But if he married Lila, who was carrying his child, he could claim everything without Hailey in the picture. This had never been about love. Her entire relationship, her engagement, had been a lie. The murmurs turned into outright gasps when Andre suddenly stepped forward and slapped her. The sharp crack of the impact echoed in the air, and Hailey staggered back, her veil slipping from her hair. "You should have known your place," he sneered, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "This was never meant for you." Hailey pressed a trembling hand to her cheek, her ears ringing. The humiliation was unbearable. Lila, standing beside Andre now, let out a soft laugh. "Sorry, sis," she said, tilting her head with false sympathy. "But you always had everything. It's my turn now." Andre motioned to the security guards standing by the entrance. "Get her out of here," he ordered. Two men stepped forward, their hesitation clear, but they moved anyway. Hailey felt their hands grab her arms, dragging her away from the altar, from the life she had built, from everything she had thought was hers. Her veil crumpled on the ground behind her, forgotten. She had walked down the aisle expecting forever. Instead, she was being thrown out of her own wedding like a stranger. Like she was nothing. The doors slammed shut behind her. The distant sound of applause from inside made her stomach churn. She stumbled down the stone steps, the weight of betrayal pressing against her chest like a crushing force. Tears blurred her vision, but through them, she saw something that changed everything. Her purse, her phone, and the call she had missed while walking down the aisle. It was from her lawyer, and as she read the first line of the text he had sent her, everything inside her hardened. "Hailey, we found something on Andre. Call me immediately." Her fingers tightened around the phone. Andre and Lila thought they had won, but they had no idea what was coming for them. Hailey stood outside the grand wedding hall, her wedding dress no longer a symbol of love, but of betrayal. The world around her felt distant, the cheers from inside, the whispers of shocked guests, the sting of Andre's slap still burning on her cheek. Everything she had built, everything she had believed in, had been ripped away in the span of minutes. But as she clutched her phone, her lawyer's urgent message flashing on the screen, something inside her shifted. The pain, the humiliation, the heartbreak, it all burned away, leaving only cold determination in its place. Andre and Lila thought they had won. They were wrong. With trembling hands, she pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before a firm voice answered. Hailey, her lawyer, Mark Benson, said immediately. Are you okay? She let out a shaky breath. No, but I don't have time for that. Tell me what you found. There was a brief pause before Mark spoke again, his tone laced with urgency. Andre isn't who he says he is. Hailey's stomach twisted. What do you mean? Mark sighed. For weeks, I've been digging into his background. He claimed to be a successful businessman, right? Well, his businesses are all fronts. He's drowning in debt. And here's the kicker, he's already married. Hailey's breath caught in her throat. What? Andre Moore is legally married to a woman in Texas. Her name is Angela Pearson. They never divorced. Her pulse pounded in her ears. If Andre was already married, that meant his planned wedding to Lila was illegal. Do you have proof? She asked, her voice steady now. Mark didn't hesitate. Absolutely. I've got the marriage certificate, bank records showing multiple fraud attempts, and even messages between him and Lila discussing how to get control of your business. I was going to show you before the wedding, but I wanted to have everything locked down. Hailey clenched her fists. The betrayal was deeper than she had imagined. Lila hadn't just stolen her fiancé. She had conspired to steal everything. Send me everything, she said, her voice calm, but laced with something new. Resolve. Hailey didn't break down. She didn't run away. Instead, she stood taller, stronger. She wiped the tear stains from her cheeks, straightened her veil, and took a deep breath. Then she marched right back into the wedding hall. The entire room went silent when the doors swung open. Every eye turned to her as she strode forward, her steps measured, precise. Andre, standing beside Lila at the altar, scowled. I thought I told security to. Sit down, Andre, she cut him off, her voice sharper than he had ever heard it. A murmur spread through the crowd. Lila stiffened, but she forced a smirk. Soph, you're embarrassing yourself. The wedding is over. Go home. Hailey ignored her. She reached into her bag, pulled out a stack of papers, and held them up for everyone to see. Andre Moore is a fraud, she announced, her voice carrying through the room. And this marriage? It's a joke. Because he's already married. Gasps filled the room. Andre's face turned pale. That's a lie. Oh, really? Hailey cut him off, turning to the officiant. Reverend, do you allow bigamy in your ceremonies? The officiant looked horrified. Absolutely not. Hailey handed him the proof. Andre Moore has a wife in Texas, she continued, flipping through the documents. And if that wasn't enough, he's been using fake business fronts to hide his debts. He's been plotting with my sister to steal my business, drain my accounts, and leave me with nothing. The murmurs grew louder. The guests, who had once clapped for Andre and Lila, were now looking at them with disgust. Lila grabbed Andre's arm. Tell them it's not true, she whispered, but her voice trembled. Andre tried to smile, but sweat dripped down his forehead. Baby, you don't believe her, do you? Hailey smiled. Now for the final blow. You think I came here without proof? She asked. Then she raised her phone. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to present Exhibit A. She pressed play. Through the speakers, Andre's voice filled the room. A recorded conversation. Once I marry Lila, the bakery will be mine. Hailey won't see it coming. She's too naive. A collective gasp rang through the hall. Andre's face twisted in horror. Where did you? Hailey met his eyes. Did you really think I wouldn't be prepared? Lila's face went ghostly white. Andre, what is this? Andre stumbled backward. Lila, listen, Slap. Lila's palm connected with Andre's face hard. The sound echoed through the hall. You were just using me, she shrieked. This was all about the bakery? Hailey crossed her arms. Surprised, Lila? You should have known. You were never going to be his queen. Just his pawn. Lila turned on her, her eyes blazing with fury. You think you've won, she hissed. You think this makes you better than me? Hailey didn't flinch. She simply smiled. Oh, I don't think. I know. Then, before Lila or Andre could react, the police stormed in. Andre Moore, a stern voice called. A police officer stepped forward, holding a warrant. You're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and attempted financial embezzlement. Andre turned white as they slapped handcuffs on his wrists. This is a mistake. You can't. Oh, we can, the officer replied. And thanks to Ms. Turner's evidence, we have more than enough to charge you. Andre struggled, but it was no use. The officers dragged him away, his shouts fading as the doors slammed shut behind him. Lila, now alone, turned to Hailey, her face a mixture of rage and desperation. "You think you're so smart," she spat. "But you'll regret this. One day, you'll be alone, and no one will be there to save you." Hailey tilted her head. "Maybe. But at least I won't be the woman who betrayed her own sister for a man who never loved her." Lila's lips trembled, but she had nothing left to say. With no allies, no Andre, and no stolen fortune, she turned and fled, leaving behind the wreckage of her own making. The room was silent. Then slowly applause. People clapped, her friends, her colleagues, even some distant relatives. Someone whistled. Someone else muttered, "Damn, that was a movie." Hailey simply stood there, her heart steady, her spine straight. She had walked into this wedding expecting heartbreak. Instead, she had walked out victorious. The world outside the grand wedding hall was quiet, too quiet. The contrast between the chaos inside and the eerie stillness outside was almost unsettling. Hailey stood on the stone steps, watching as Andre was shoved into the back of a police car. His once confident smirk was gone, replaced with pure panic. Lila, on the other hand, had disappeared. Coward. The cool evening breeze brushed against Hailey's face, but she barely felt it. She was numb. Not from pain. Not from heartbreak. But from clarity. She had just lost her fiancé. Her sister had betrayed her. Her wedding, her supposed dream day, had turned into a public scandal. And yet, for the first time in months, she felt free. A few of the guests trickled out, murmuring amongst themselves, glancing at her with a mix of pity and awe. Some had already taken out their phones, no doubt updating social media with wedding disaster of the year posts. Hailey didn't care. Let them talk. Let them spread the news. She had no shame in what had happened. If anything, she had won. A familiar voice called her name. She turned to see her best friend, Ava, rushing toward her, worry etched across her face. "Oh my God, are you okay?" Ava grabbed Hailey's hands, scanning her face for any signs of tears. Hailey took a deep breath. "I don't know what I am," she admitted. Ava squeezed her hands. "You're a damn queen, that's what. Do you realize what you just did? You turned your own wedding into a takedown of two snakes." Hailey let out a small, almost disbelieving laugh. "I didn't plan for it to go that way." "Well, fate did," Ava said. "And honestly, you deserve a standing ovation." Hailey looked down at her wedding dress, now a painful reminder of everything she had believed in. Slowly, she reached up and pulled off her veil, letting it fall to the steps behind her. "Come on," Ava nudged her. "Let's go get a drink." Hailey hesitated. Her bakery was only a few blocks away. And suddenly, she knew exactly where she wanted to be. Turner's Bakery had always been her sanctuary. The familiar scent of cinnamon, vanilla, and fresh bread greeted her as she pushed open the doors. It was late, and the shop was closed, but she had the keys. Flipping on the lights, she let out a deep breath. This was hers. Her business. Her empire. Not Andre's. Not Lila's. She had built this from the ground up, with her own two hands. And no one, could ever take that from her. Ava locked the door behind them and headed straight for the counter, grabbing 2 wine glasses from the display shelf. "Tonight, we celebrate." Hailey raised an eyebrow. "Celebrate what?" "The fact that I was humiliated in front of an entire crowd." Ava smirked. "No, babe. The fact that you burned that entire circus to the ground and walked out without a scratch." Hailey chuckled, shaking her head. "It doesn't feel like a victory yet." "Oh, but it is." Ava poured them both a glass. "You exposed them. You got Andre arrested. You stopped Lila from stealing what's yours. And best of all, you're free of both of them." Hailey lifted her glass, studying the deep red color of the wine. Freedom. That was exactly what this was. She clinked her glass against Ava's. "To new beginnings. To the biggest glow-up of the century," Ava corrected with a grin. Hailey took a sip, letting the warmth of the wine spread through her. She wasn't broken. She wasn't defeated. She was just getting started. While Hailey was reclaiming her power, Lila was watching her world crumble. She had barely made it home, her mind racing. How had everything fallen apart so fast? She had won, or at least she had thought she had. Andre was supposed to be hers. The business was supposed to be hers. Instead, she had lost everything. She sat in her dark apartment, staring blankly at her phone. Social media was already ablaze with the scandal. People were calling her every name under the sun. Her so-called friends had turned on her, refusing to answer her messages. And Andre? Gone. In jail. Her heart pounded as she opened her bank app, desperately hoping the money Andre had promised was still there. Insufficient funds. Her stomach dropped. Andre had been lying to her too. There was no money, no security, no future. And worst of all, she had burned the only bridge she had ever had. A week passed. Hailey spent her time drowning herself in work, pouring every bit of energy into her bakery. Then, on a quiet afternoon, the bell above the bakery door rang. She looked up and froze. Lila stood there. She was a mess. Her once perfect makeup was smudged, her hair unkempt. But what caught Hailey's attention most was the sheer desperation in her eyes. "What do you want?" Hailey asked coolly, crossing her arms. Lila swallowed hard. I need help." Hailey let out a short, humorless laugh. "Help?" Lila nodded, her eyes pleading. "I have nothing, Hailey. Andre took everything. No one will hire me. I don't even have enough for rent. Please. I made a mistake." Hailey stared at her, unblinking. For years, she had given Lila everything. A home, a job, support. And in return, Lila had betrayed her in the worst way possible. Now she was here, begging. For a long moment, Hailey said nothing. Then finally she spoke. "You want a job?" Lila's face lit up with hope. "Yes. I'll do anything, Soph, I swear." Hailey smiled. But it wasn't warm. "Good," she said, grabbing an apron from behind the counter and tossing it at her. "Because you'll be starting as a dishwasher." Lila blinked. "What?" "You heard me," Hailey said, leaning in. "You can scrub plates in the back. Minimum wage. No tips." Lila's mouth opened and closed, as if she wanted to argue. But she couldn't, because she had no other choice. Swallowing her pride, she nodded. Hailey watched as Lila slowly walked to the back of the bakery, tying the apron around her waist. She had been betrayed. She had been humiliated. But now, she was the one in control. And it felt damn good. That night, Hailey closed the bakery with a quiet satisfaction she had never felt before. She wasn't the same woman who had stood at that altar. That woman had been naive. This woman had survived. And she was ready for whatever came next. The weeks following Hailey's ruined wedding were nothing like she had expected. She had braced herself for the sting of heartbreak, the loneliness that often followed betrayal. She had imagined waking up to an empty bed, feeling the loss of what could have been. She had feared the whispers in the streets, the pitying glances from customers who had heard about the scandal. But instead, she felt something else. Relief. Not sadness. Not regret. Just freedom. Hailey threw herself into her bakery, pouring all her energy into expanding the business she had nearly lost to Andre and Lila. She hired 2 new employees to help with the growing demand and started working on a second location downtown. For the first time in years, she wasn't working to provide for someone else. She was doing this for herself. Lila, now working in the back of the bakery as a dishwasher, barely spoke to her. The proud, entitled sister who had once strutted around like she owned the place was now quiet, defeated. And Hailey? She let her feel it. Lila had made her choices. Now she had to live with them. One crisp autumn morning, as Hailey was finishing up the day's orders, the bell above the door jingled. "Be right with you," she called out, dusting flour off her hands before looking up. Her breath caught. A man stood at the counter, scanning the bakery with quiet curiosity. He was tall, dressed in a fitted charcoal suit that seemed to take in everything. His presence was effortless, the kind that made people step aside without even realizing it. Hailey straightened. "Can I help you?" He smiled slightly, tapping his fingers on the wooden counter. "That depends. Do you make apple turnovers?" She raised an eyebrow. "Only the best in the city." "That's a bold claim." Hailey smirked, already grabbing a fresh turnover from the display. "Try it and see for yourself." He took a bite, his eyes widening slightly before he nodded in approval. "Okay, I'll admit it. This might actually be the best apple turnover I've had." "I don't lie about my baking," she teased. "So, what brings you here, mister?" "Daniel Carter." Hailey blinked. She knew that name. Daniel Carter was one of the most well-known investors in Chicago, an entrepreneur with a reputation for turning small businesses into massive successes. And now he was in her bakery? "What's a man like you doing in a place like this?" she asked, folding her arms. He chuckled. "I was in the area. Heard a lot about Turner's Bakery. Thought I'd see for myself if the rumors were true." Hailey leaned on the counter. And they were. There was something in his gaze, something assessing, but not in a way that made her uncomfortable. He wasn't just looking at her bakery. He was looking at her. And for the first time since Andre, she felt a spark of something unfamiliar. Possibility. Daniel returned the next day. And the next. By the end of the week, he wasn't just a customer, he was a regular. Then, one evening, after the bakery had closed, he made an offer. "I think you could expand," he said, leaning against the counter. "Not just one more location. 5. Maybe even more." Hailey raised an eyebrow. "And let me guess, you want to be my investor?" He shrugged. "I think you have something special here. Something worth growing." Hailey studied him carefully. She had learned her lesson about trusting too easily. But Daniel wasn't like Andre. He didn't flatter her with empty words or try to charm his way into her life. He respected what she had built. And more importantly, he saw her as an equal. A month later, the paperwork was signed. Turner's Bakery was officially expanding, with Daniel as a silent investor. But business wasn't the only thing growing. Hailey found herself looking forward to his visits, to the way he always ordered the same apple turnover, but never ate it until after their conversations. To the way he listened, really listened. To the way he made her feel seen. And slowly, cautiously, she allowed herself to wonder. Could love still exist after heartbreak? Because for the first time in a long time, Hailey wasn't just rebuilding a business. She was rebuilding herself. Hailey never expected to trust a man again. Not after Andre. Not after the betrayal, the lies, the humiliation. But Daniel Carter was different. He never pushed, never rushed, never made her feel like she owed him anything. He was patient, steady, like the quiet hum of a well-running machine. And yet, there was something about him that made her heart race in a way she hadn't felt in years. At first, she kept him at a distance. Business was business. He was her investor, and she refused to mix emotions with finances ever again. But Daniel didn't just invest in Turner's Bakery. He invested in her. It started with small moments. He would stop by after meetings, rolling up his sleeves to help carry flour bags inside. He'd linger at the counter, casually listening as she talked about new recipes, his eyes always focused, always interested. One evening, as they were going over expansion plans, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You know what I like about you, Hailey?" She raised an eyebrow. "My turnovers?" He smirked. "Well, yes. But more than that, you don't wait for someone to save you. You save yourself." His words struck something deep inside her. Andre had made her feel small, like she was something to be possessed, owned. But Daniel saw her as a force. And for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder, was she ready for more? One evening, after closing up the bakery, Daniel was waiting outside. "Busy?" he asked, hands casually in his pockets. Hailey gave him a look. "It's almost midnight. What do you think?" He chuckled. "Come with me." She hesitated. "Where?" "Just trust me." And for some reason, she did. He drove them to a quiet rooftop overlooking the city skyline. A table was set, simple but elegant, with warm candlelight flickering against the night breeze. Hailey folded her arms. "What's this?" Daniel shrugged. "I figured you've spent enough time taking care of everyone else. Maybe it's time someone took care of you." Her breath caught. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't grand. But it was real. And as they sat there, talking about everything and nothing, laughing under the stars, Hailey realized something terrifying. She was falling. It happened naturally. They were walking back to the car when he reached for her hand. Slowly, carefully, like he was waiting for her to pull away. She didn't. He turned to her. "Hailey." She swallowed hard. "Yeah. You know I'm not him, right?" She froze. Daniel didn't need to say Andre's name. She knew exactly what he meant. He wasn't here to take from her. He wasn't here to use her. He was here because he wanted her. And for the first time since Andre's betrayal, Hailey let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have more. So when Daniel leaned in, giving her every chance to step away, she didn't. Instead, she closed the distance herself. And as their lips met, soft and slow, the city lights twinkling behind them, Hailey felt something she hadn't in a long, long time. Hope. Hailey had always thought that love was supposed to be grand, the kind of all-consuming passion that made people lose themselves. That's what she thought she had with Andre, until she realized it was nothing more than an illusion. But with Daniel, it was different. It was steady. It was real. And for the first time in a long time, it was hers. Months passed, and Turner's Bakery flourished under its expansion. 2 new locations had already opened, with 3 more under construction. Business was booming, And for once, Hailey wasn't doing it alone. Daniel wasn't just her investor, he was her partner. They worked side by side, making decisions together, balancing business and life in a way she never thought possible. He never undermined her, never made her feel like she owed him anything. Instead, he believed in her. And that was everything. One evening, after closing up the bakery, Hailey heard a knock at the back entrance. She opened the door, and there stood Lila. She looked worse than before, her once flawless hair now dull, her expensive clothes replaced by cheap second-hand pieces. But it was her eyes that caught Hailey's attention. Gone was the arrogance, the entitlement. Now, all that was left was desperation. "Hailey," Lila whispered, voice shaky. "I need help." Hailey folded her arms. "Help." Lila nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I lost my apartment. No one will hire me. I have nothing." A year ago, Hailey would have forgiven her instantly. She would have taken Lila in, given her a job, let her back into her life. But this wasn't a year ago. This was now. And Hailey had learned her lesson. "You made your choices, Lila," she said softly. "You chose to betray me. You chose Andre. You chose greed over family." Lila sniffled. "I was stupid, okay? I was selfish. But I'm still your sister." Hailey took a deep breath. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm going to give you one final chance." Lila's eyes widened with hope. "Really?" Hailey nodded and reached into her bag, pulling out a small envelope. Lila snatched it eagerly, but when she opened it, her face fell. "This is a bus ticket?" Hailey nodded. "It'll take you anywhere you want to go. A fresh start. But that's all I'm offering." Lila looked up at her, betrayed. "That's it?" Hailey met her gaze, unwavering. "That's it." For a moment, she thought Lila might argue, might try to convince her one last time. But then her shoulders slumped, and she simply nodded. Without another word, she turned and walked away. That night, as Hailey sat on the rooftop of her bakery, staring out at the city lights, she felt something she hadn't in years. Peace. She had let go of the past. She had built something for herself. And now, she was finally free. She didn't even hear Daniel approach until he sat beside her, handing her a warm cup of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, smiling. Hailey took a sip before glancing at him. "Just thinking about how far I've come." Daniel chuckled. "You have no idea how proud I am of you." Hailey turned fully toward him, smiling. "You're a big part of that, you know." Daniel shook his head. "No, Hailey. You did this. You saved yourself." She opened her mouth to respond, but then he pulled out a small velvet box. Hailey's breath hitched. Daniel looked her in the eyes, serious but soft. "I know you don't need saving. You never did. But I want to walk beside you, through everything. If you'll have me." He flipped the box open, revealing a stunning gold band with a single, elegant diamond. Hailey's heart pounded. This wasn't like Andre's proposal. There was no pressure, no ownership. Just love. Real. Honest. Pure. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she smiled. "Yes," she whispered. Daniel grinned, slipping the ring onto her finger before pulling her into a kiss, one filled with every promise he had ever made her. And as the city lights shimmered around them, Hailey knew this was her happily ever after. Not because of a man, not because of fate, but because she had fought for it. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story. Do not forget to turn on your notification for my next video.